In a world of hyperconnectivity, we seem more disconnected than ever from the living world. A world of natural wonder that has its own systems in place and masters the art of coexistence. We, humans, have placed ourselves outside this way of living, but it can teach us the biggest lessons and leave us in awe. What happens when we reconnect to the nature from which we arose, move in sync with it, and coexist in a symbiotic way? Will we make other decisions? Will it change the way we perceive ourselves? What and who can teach us if we are willing to listen? We invite you to be open and amazed by today's guests as they offer a glimpse into their art of coexistence. Today I am joined by Marta de Menezes, a Portuguese artist who works at the intersection of art and biology since the late 90s. At this intersection, she explores how biological sciences offer us conceptual and aesthetic opportunities. She turns this into BioArt. Marta is also curator for international exhibitions and the director of Cultivamos Cultura, an institution devoted to experimental art in Portugal, and she is the director of Ectopia, a space dedicated to facilitate the collaborative work between artists and scientists, also in Portugal. I'm curious to understand how she became an artist in this interesting field where science and art meets. Welcome, Marta, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Daphne.
Thanks very much. I am aware, as we've spoken before, that you are currently not necessarily working on an artistic project yourself, as you are very busy with writing proposals and doing admin work for Cultivamos Cultura. But I do like to talk about your artistic practice first, just to start with. And especially for those listeners that do not understand what BioArt is, I wanted to ask you if you can maybe describe your work or your field of work. What exactly is BioArt?
Well, BioArt is a field that I think challenges definition, like I think most art fields do. My work is particularly focused on, I'm an artist, so I'm not a bioartist, and I make art, and sometimes that art belongs into the field of bioart. Sometimes it doesn't. For me, it's important to make this decision mostly because I see my work and my process as an artist very much in the same way as any other artist in any other field does artwork. If anything, I may be more conceptual based than form based. It's very much guided by the ideas behind it. And the reason why I focus so much on biologically or biotechnology knowledge is because I think that in contemporary times, the field of biology has evolved very quickly, and it's one of the most prolific fields of knowledge that has provided us new knowledge. Mm-hmm. To think of ourselves, about the world around us, to think about how society is built, how we live in it. Mm-hmm. The knowledge that I learn from biology and from biotechnology allows me to really sharpen and re-problematize the questions that I want to put forward with my work.
Yeah, can I just ask, because we're getting very deep into your philosophical reasoning behind your art, which is beautiful already, but I am very curious because you have a degree in fine arts, so that's where it started. And as you said, rightfully so, you said, I am an artist. That's where it starts for you. From that background of fine arts, how do you then become to be so interested in biological science? And when was there a tipping point for you when you decided, but wait a minute, this is actually a field where I can combine my fine arts education with all the questions that I have of what it means to be a human being, combined then with biology? Was there a trigger point for you at some point during your...
I suppose there are many factors. Like most questions or most things, you have a lot of factors that contribute to decisions that you make along your life. And I cannot pinpoint a tipping point or a trigger or something like that. I suppose that I was as comfortable with exact sciences or the not so exact sciences as I was with the humanity. Well, probably the humanities actually not so much, because I was terrible at languages and I'm not very comfortable with philosophy and things like this. The comfort with philosophy came later. But when I was growing up, that was not something I was that comfortable with. I was more comfortable with the sciences than with a lot of the humanities. So when I did choose to go towards art, I suppose I was predisposed to look elsewhere always for things that were inspiring or interesting for me. And I didn't see them as competing fields ever, or as opposite fields ever. It was always about knowledge in a more philosophical and metaphysical way than separating cultures. So I suppose I was never very much influenced by this two cultures moment in history that we were living when I was younger.
For you, it's been interdisciplinary always. You've always seen the crossovers.
I had an appetite for knowledge in general. Whether that came from one place or another really didn't matter to me. I never felt limited in searching for it in a specific place. So when I started university, I not only didn't particularly like the feel of how the making was structured necessarily, and the lack of camaraderie that I could see, that it sort of, I think, predisposed me to look elsewhere. So my friends were not in the arts a lot. And they were scientists, they were studying biology in different fields. So this sort of made my environment more multidisciplinary than most people would. When I think back, I recognize that I was learning a lot in the arts, and part of the process that I was learning was when you start a project and you're proposed an idea to develop, you need to look for knowledge about that idea in every field that you can. So this for me is very much an artistic methodology that I was taught very early in my academic years. You're proposed a subject like all of your colleagues. And I suppose the difference was that when I was searching for knowledge, I would go to philosophy, I would go to art theory, I would go to art history, but I would also go to the more science fields to understand if there was knowledge there that I could explore the theme with. And I suppose that was the main difference between me and my colleagues and the output that I came out with. I think the challenges for me with the scientists were I had to learn to ask a lot more questions, that the mechanisms and the questions within science are often not very easy to process for someone who's more literate in the humanities. But I guess for me, I was doing this more or less at the same time, and in a time of my life that I was very much focused on learning. So it was not very complicated to do. And I suppose that did help not get into cul-de-sacs, pockets that would trap me.
I understand, yeah. And I think this is what you mean when you say the research you do is always, it's art-based research, meaning you can explore lots of different disciplines to go deeper into a certain theme that you want to express. Whereas if you do this within a discipline, you're always limited. Is that what you mean with the art-based research?
I suppose so. It's just, I don't know how to say it any other way. For me, making an art project, I was taught to make an art project by starting with research. And I recognize in colleagues that have never worked with biology or sciences before, I recognize that methodology. We just go into different books, for instance, okay? We read different books. I read scientific papers to look for the concepts that they're working with, and they go into most art theory or philosophy, or I don't know even which kind of books they go into. But when colleagues of mine are developing a project, they bring me, oh, have you read this article? It's more often than not about from an art theory pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm looking into a concept, I unavoidably go, okay, this sounds really interesting. Maybe genetics or biochemistry has a really interesting way to...
Mm-hmm. And to approach it from a different angle. Yeah, I see. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you sometimes say that that philosophy wasn't your thing or that it hasn't been philosophical. Whereas for me, everything that I see, what you've been doing is all about asking questions, which philosophy is also about, just asking questions and trying to understand who we are and why we do what we do. And I love to dig deeper into a few of your projects, just to give that a bit more, to explain it a little bit better. But what I also wanted to ask you is that you have on your website a BioArt manifest. I think that is great to have for any art discipline, but for any topic in general, it's good to have some statutes in how you perceive it to be. Can you tell me how this manifesto came to life, who you wrote it with, and why this group of people felt the necessity to write it?
Of course. So the BioArt manifesto was actually relatively recent, especially if you think of when the people that signed it actually started doing this. It came very late in our process. And I think for every one of us, there's a slightly different reason why we decided to sign it. And I also kind of want to include the people that didn't sign it into this conversation, because just the same way that I had my reasons to sign it, there were reasons for people who didn't sign it not to sign it, even though they were somewhat involved in the process. So I think the main question for me has to do with what I was telling you earlier, which is the definition of BioArt is a complicated one. It should be a complicated one. It shouldn't be fixed. And it's one of the things that I appreciate more when you talk about contemporary art and when you talk about an experimental part of contemporary art, is that it's important for you to define how you see it as an artist if you're working in that field, because it will allow people to understand and to contextualize your work within what your parameters are when you're making work and when you're presenting work. From the very beginning, one of the hardest things, I remember this feeling very, very forcefully, and I'm sort of named as a pioneer in art and biology and BioArt, right? It's a very weird thing to do. Or to feel.
What does it make you feel?
It's just, you have this idea that, they wanted to be so different from everybody else. I didn't necessarily want to be different. I was just doing what I do, and my realm of reality allowed me to use a series of knowledge that didn't come from the usual places where artists go and look for knowledge. And this is why I went into biology. So it was not intentional move to be different or to be edgy or to be original or anything like this. This was all of the feelings that I had problems with in art school. Everybody wanted to be original. Everybody wanted to be different. Originality was a big thing. And if you want to leave a legacy, you need to make that legacy something completely different from before. Also, it was one of the reasons why I think we never really fit into the role of a new movement, was because, and also there was a very important aspect, which was we didn't feel that there was enough commonalities between the artists that were working in biology at that time, which was in the late 90s or even mid 80s with Joe Davis, that there was not a lot of commonalities. The only commonality was that we were all working with biology and with living organisms or living material as a medium to express concepts. And that didn't seem to be enough to create a manifesto kind of situation.
How did you differentiate yourself then from the other artists that were working with biology, but not in the same way?
The subjects were very different. So if you think of tissue culture and art, they were very political in their statements, in their artworks. They were very much about commenting how, and that felt very important to me as an artist, that was a very big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because one of the things in the manifesto, it says, and I thought this one was very relevant and interesting as well to put in there, is that you give the audience, the viewer of the artwork, responsibility. So what you say in the manifesto is, we trust art audiences to recognize that because bioart is alive, all bioart has political, social, cultural, and ethical implications, whether or not these are made explicit by the artist. So you give a lot of responsibility back to the viewer of the artwork, that they understand that what you do can be challenging or provoking or speculative and all those things. How do you see this in general with people interacting with your work? Is there sometimes a shock effect that they don't understand it? Do they ask a lot of you? Do you feel like there is like either criticism or curiosity? What does it provoke, you think?
Well, this is the beauty about art. I think art is the least demagogic of practices, maybe. Or I believe that this is one of the pluses of art, is that it's not paternalistic in a way. It doesn't, it's a field of knowledge where you're allowed to play. Freedom is a given, and it's not just freedom for the artist, it's freedom for everybody that is involved in the art. And in art, the audience is as involved in it as much as the artist is. And so it would feel very wrong to me to take control. It's not a message. Art is not a message. I cannot control. And part of the responsibility of the art needs to be in everybody that is involved in it, including the audience itself. Maybe this is the inheritance from performance and from the happenings and from ephemeral art, and I'm thinking of the fancier, when the audience takes the central role and the artist takes a secondary role, almost the making or on the art formation. The position of the author is put in question with that. I think this is one of the most contemporary aspects of art, is where the authorship is put into question, where the art is put into question, and how could I be a contemporary artist if that was not a part of the things that are a part of the artwork that I make? So I think that's that part of the manifesto is a statement that more than just about bioart, contemporary art at its core is, where is it created? Where does it make the knowledge that it's making?
Well, and I think another important part in this point that I just quoted is that it says also, because bioart is alive. That part of bioart is, of course, very interesting, because you do work with live organisms, like human, non-human cells, proteins, and things like that. So another part in the manifesto, it says bioart challenges the boundaries between the human and the non-human, the living and the non-living, the natural and the artificial. Here as well, I think this is something where your audience can be surprised, right? Because they're living artworks. They're actually things that come either from the body or that come from the plants, and you can see things moving. It is very much alive. How do you see that placed in the whole realm of contemporary art, that you're working with things that are alive?
So for contemporary art to have so much life in it, for me, makes perfect sense, because we are in a moment of history where, again, going back to the things that I mentioned before, biology and biotechnology are challenging our perceptions of ourselves, of how we understand the world, how we understand the interactions between organisms in the world. So it makes perfect sense in my mind that contemporary art would acquire
something that's alive,
that would challenge our understanding of what is and what is not alive. both ways in a way, make us think that things that were never considered to be alive.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Could you give an example of the latter? So if you say something that we maybe always saw as something that's alive, maybe it's just as alive as a stone. Could you give an example just to have something more tangible or visible?
But you just mentioned proteins. Mm-hmm. Proteins are not alive. They do not fall into alive things. But we do still think of them as alive because they move.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's a good example. Yeah.
So I would never consider them alive. But there's also the very big discussion of it is a very big discussion. Viruses were considered not living organisms for a very long time, and every new scientist that I talk to, they will still have, some of them will go, oh no, I'm more conservative. And I think that viruses are still not, or should not still be considered living organisms. And other people think, but they replicate. So wasn't that the most fundamental thing about defining if something is alive or not? And this is the thing. I suppose I could not ever avoid going into philosophy when I'm talking about things like this. There's no other way of looking into this, if not for philosophy. It's challenging, but incredibly exciting because it's challenging, because it makes you doubt your criteria for determining things. And this is the most fun of it. No?
And that is what drives you as well, to keep asking those questions always. Yeah. I think maybe this is also a good moment to actually understand what it is that you then do with your artworks. So you already mentioned yourself, like there is not one specific topic or field that you're interested in. So you have things that are about spaces, you have things about immunity, sex, evolution. So it goes in lots of different directions of questioning what those things mean, what those words mean, what those concepts mean, maybe. If we go to one project, maybe you have one in mind yourself, but if I can ask one, I was thinking about Inner Cloud. I think that one is interesting to talk about a little bit more, just because I think the question you pose with that project is a very nice philosophical one, and I'm very curious how you would explain this concept and also how you can describe it, maybe what it could look like visually.
Inner Cloud is fun, and from my projects, I suppose personally I see it as a game more than any other project. A game of words, a sort of a game that I suppose it has to do with my understanding that I'm not sure if it's a phrase or if it's a concept, but I've heard it multiple times in many different languages. Everything we don't understand or we understand as magic at some point could eventually be understood as science at a later moment. I think Inner Cloud plays on a little bit on this idea, for me at least, which is I love how researchers in many different moments in history that tried to understand where does the soul come from, and it can be called the soul, it can be called animas, it can be called anything. And Inner Cloud is inspired very much by the story of Balthasar and Blimunda. It was written by José Saramago, who was the Portuguese author that did win a Nobel Prize for a different book, not that one specifically. But it's a story that we all read in school, right? It's one of my favorite stories of him. And in the story, you have this priest and this Blimunda, who's one of the main characters, who could capture the souls. It takes place in the big plague moment. So you have a lot of people dying, and she would capture the souls. So the priest would tell you that the souls want to rise up to heaven. And he devised a vessel that could fly, lifted by these souls that want to go up to heaven. And Blimunda would capture these from the dying people, and they would put them in these spheres, and this would raise their vessel into the air, and then they could travel.
They're kind of imprisoning the souls, kind of. put them in a...
So many things happening there. Beautifully poetic, but at the same time very cruel and very violent in many ways, right? Nobody wants their soul to be imprisoned in something like this, but do you believe in souls and wherever they should go or not is, have so many questions happening there. The story is really interesting in many different ways. I was, watching what DNA looks like when you try to isolate it and make it visible through precipitation. It immediately popped into my brain that this would be how they would look like, how the clouds that she was imprisoning in the spheres that lift up this thing would look like. They're fragile. It looks like a little cloud of material that is suspended in liquid.
Because you would then, where would you put the DNA in? How did you come to see this? Because I can't see DNA right now with the naked eye. So what is it? What is the action that you do?
It's actually a very basic. I think every science fair or open day will show you DNA by using this technique. So it's a precipitation of your DNA. DNA is a molecule that is invisible. And you can extract DNA from any organic material. The easiest one is probably fruit, and the most common used is either strawberries, bananas, or kiwis, and things like this. And so, in an open day for a science department in most places, you will perform this. This is something that you can actually do also in your kitchen. So you have the organism. It can be dead or not dead. It doesn't really matter. DNA is still in there because it has cells. And so what you do is you try to break the cell walls because the DNA is inside the cells. So you mash the material very forcefully. You can blend it. You can mash it with a stick. So you just make it into a mush, and you're breaking some of the cell walls. The second part that people really enjoy learning about is that the cell wall, the cell membrane is made of lipids. And so you use a chemical agent that will break that cell wall to make sure that all the DNA comes out of there. And this chemical is a very basic one. It's actually dishwashing detergent, hand, because it's the thing that we know that we make that is more efficient at breaking lipids, breaking fat. And it does so for the walls of the cells as well. So you add a drop of dishwashing fluid into your mix, and all the walls of the cells that are in there are going to break apart, and the DNA is going to come out of them. And then you have the DNA there. You can't see it yet because it's messed up with all of the cell debris and all of that. But what you do is you then put ethanol in, and the ethanol will dehydrate the molecules in there. And eventually, if you have a little bit of meat tenderizer and the ethanol, you have a separation. So the debris will go down and the DNA will start to climb up because it's going to be pulled up by the dryness of the ethanol. And you start to see it as strings. And eventually it becomes a little cloud.
And that's what you saw.
That's what you see when you do that. When you perform that technique, it's not a very fancy technique. It's not a very sophisticated technique. It's actually a demonstration that scientists do. It's not a very useful technique anymore. There's not very much that you can do with precipitated DNA except look at it. Okay, it's not a technology that scientists do often to do anything about it. What I did for In a Cloud is I used my own cells. I used white blood cells. So in your blood, you have the red blood cells that don't have any DNA in them, and you have the white blood cells that do have your DNA in it. You can use those and precipitate that DNA. For In a Cloud, that's the material that I used.
So we saw, if we got to see this, if people would have seen this, they saw your inner cloud. And with that, you were actually saying with this work, maybe they saw my soul, or is my soul in my DNA? Is that the question that you then ask yourself?
That that is the question that most people will ask of themselves. Of course, this is also a comment on genetic determinism. Is for a very long time now, and it's still very present, I feel, people equate what is in your genes to your identity, to who you are, to everything that you will become during. It's almost, for a while, it was so bad that people thought everything was written in the DNA. And now we know that this is not the case. Made perfect sense for me to show DNA. And I assumed correctly, that most people will associate it with, okay, is our soul also written into that DNA, or is a soul something other? Where is it? And can it be made visible or not?
I was just going to say, because if you want to believe in it, can you then also, then you would want to see it as well, right? Because if you want to, it's difficult to believe in something that you don't see, or like that is what we like, I suppose, especially with science, is that you can make things visible and then understand how things work. But then you actually make it even a bit more abstract again to talk about the soul in the science, which is then, I suppose, so that is then what makes it. This is then where this process, which is a process you say anyone can do in any kind of lab, but is what makes it art, is because you then pose that question of the soul. Yeah. So this is where the two interact. And this is also, I think, what makes all the work very philosophical, is that there's always this question behind the actual research, right? It's not just we're looking for the facts and how things work, where you're actually asking questions behind questions behind questions. Another work, I think, which is a very important one in your life, and also in your personal life, if I may add, but you can explain how that works, and maybe you already know which one I'm gonna mention, but you can guess, and then I tell you if you guess right.
Immortality for two, or Anti-Marta,
either
maybe?
one of those. I was going for Anti-Marta, but the Immortality for two, I think they are a bit on the same line. Okay, maybe talk a bit about Anti-Marta first, because I think there's also a little bit of romance in that story, in that project, in that story somehow.
They have been shown as a one project, both of them, called I Am in Ars Electronica, for instance, and because they're very much connected. So the first, Immortality for two, was my first project with my husband as both scientific partner and co-author of the piece, even though our roles were better defined, as I am the artist and he's the scientist in that relationship. Anti-Marta, for me, I suppose it is a little bit more meaningful, also because it was a shift in a collaboration. I don't necessarily know if I could have with another scientist that was not also a life partner of mine. So Anti-Marta is a project that involves a skin transplant exchange between two people, and in this case is between me and my husband Luis. And the process of transplantation and rejection of the skin that was unavoidable and was expected in the process gives rise to a piece that is a piece that we both embody, speaks about our relationship, our commitment to each other. For both of us, it has slightly different meanings. It's almost like it's two works, but at the same time, this is the shift. While Immortality for two, Luis was the scientist and he was in charge of doing all of the science bits of the work, and I was in charge of doing all of the art bits of the work, how to conceptualize it, what it was about, how it was shown in a public space like a gallery or something like this. So all of that strategy was up to me as an artist, and all of the strategy of how to design the experiment that would give rise to the cells was up to Luis. For Anti-Marta, the fact that we both lived the whole process of the piece itself very differently from very different perspectives, but very much not just about the science or the art. It's not a scientific process, it's a surgery. Luis is an immunologist, so of course he understands the process of the art piece very differently from what I do. For me as an artist, Marta is very much about an affirmation of self. I am very interested as a concept in the idea of identity. It's a concept that is recurring in my artwork. Looking at immunology, and one of the fundamental concepts of immunology is the differentiation between self and non-self. I always thought that I wanted to do something about that. How does the immune system differentiate self and non-self, and why do they use self and non-self as words and not self and other, for instance,
I see.
and things like this. So self and non-self seems to be a little bit more encompassing than self
but
and other.
You say this is in immunology, they use the word self and non-self.
Yes. It's a fundamental concept for immunology. Absolutely fundamental. It's the definition of what the immune system is to define what is self and what is non-self. So I always wanted to work with that concept because it felt to me that it was a fundamental part of understanding what identity is, or where does it lie, or how is it challenged. And so this was the project for me that allowed me to do this at a very personal level, but also at a very conceptual level. So learning that activating the immune system through a transplant would create this rejection. And in this case, it would be the rejection of my life partner, was very much interesting conceptually for me to explain exactly that. This is my body defining transplant that I decided to put in my body is not me, and therefore shouldn't be expelled.
So this bit of skin that was put on you, was rejected by you.
It was an exercise of self-affirmation, a moment that I affirmed that I am not a joint organism with my husband, that I'm still me. And if you've lived with someone for a very long time, at least I feel the need to affirm my identity periodically. So it was also a very personal thing in the relationship between me and my husband. I need to remind myself that I'm not just us, that I'm not just the mother of our children, that I'm not this amalgam of two people, that I'm not just the relationship.
Your unique body of Marta. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a small thing that happens in that process. The rejection is the temporary thing. Rejection actually happens in a month, and after a month after a transplantation, you don't have the skin anymore. So it's a temporary thing. The thing that for me was so important conceptually, which was the self-affirmation, for Louise was a small thing at the beginning. For Louise, the most important thing was the result or the transformation that occurs in our bodies as a result of the transplantation itself and the rejection itself, which is the creation of antibodies that your body produces while reacting to this other, or to this non-self, and the creation of memory cells that will keep the production of antibodies alive, or will activate if a new encounter is produced. So for me, it's very beautiful and very much conceptual that for Louise, that is the commitment that we are transforming ourselves through this process, that we are the two only people in the world that will have antibodies. It's going to stay with us for our lives. In a way, for him, he described it as a pact, because it's more in depth than a marriage contract or a token commitment. It's a bodily commitment to being transformed by this other person, this love relationship, and how much a love relationship is about the transformation that you decide to undertake in yourself to be in that position with someone else. And it's a purposeful one, and it's driven by choice and not by obligation or by any
external factors.
Exactly. Thank you. And I think it's a beautiful way of looking at the piece. I don't want to take over it, but I think it's very much philosophical based and also artistic based.
Yeah, because he joined in on also on that concept of becoming each other or recognizing each other with the body, except for just seeing it as cells responding to other mechanisms, yeah,
mechanism.
biological mechanisms. That it's more than that. Yeah. No, I think it's a beautiful way of showing how you as an artist conceptualize something in combination with a scientific process or mechanism, as you just said. Yeah. And the other one that you mentioned as well, the immortality for two, as they are part of the same show you just mentioned. Can you explain a little bit about this one?
Immortality for two was more of it was an individual process at the beginning, and eventually it made perfect sense and more sense to include Luis as the scientific partner, because he's not just a scientist, he's my life partner and husband. So the research for Immortality for Two was very much based on my interest in trying to understand how we use the word immortality contemporarily and in different fields of knowledge. So for me, it was absolutely fascinating to understand that scientific community / medical community decided to call cancer, the cells that we call cancers, and the common thing that they have, as immortal cell lines. It's not that I don't understand why they choose immortal specifically, so I'll try to explain. Cancer was first described and encountered through biopsies of cancer that would show cells that didn't stop dividing. So healthy cells in our body have a number of times that they divide, and after that number of times is complete, they go into senescence and die. So they sort of commit suicide, if you wish. It's always difficult to do metaphors or analogies in these kinds of situations.
But it's helpful. But it's helpful for anyone that doesn't know the science behind it yet.
It is. You just need to remember that it's still an analogy. It's not the absolute replica of what is actually happening. And that you need to take. And I suppose this is what's fascinating for me about the names that the scientists put into things, because this is the kind of thing that drew me to how do they use immortality? Why did they choose to use immortal as a word for defining cancer, right? Because it's something that cancer is not something that we associate with immortality at any given.
It's quite the opposite, actually. Yeah,
as human, exactly. And this is the name for cancer cells, is an immortal cell line. It is purely because the internal clock that tells healthy cells to stop dividing and die is not working in cancer cells. So it's broken. And I was fascinated also because I was reading The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, the book. I think the book also plays with that idea. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is about how her cells became one of the most used tools in biotechnology research in the whole world. And it was absolutely fascinating to read. There's a lot of political issues, ethical issues, but I was absolutely fascinated about this game of words, metaphors, and analogies that we do that just, made the scientists or the scientific community choose to name cancer an immortal cell line. And so I wanted to experience, what does this mean? How does this work? So I can take my own cells out of my body and with contemporary techniques, and the techniques at the time were slightly different from what you would do at this moment today, but not that different. It was that you could break the internal clock of healthy cells and make them into a cancer cell line. So to make them into an immortal cell line, the first proposition I had for that work was to do that to my own cells. I cannot work on my own cells outside of my body. It's a health and safety risk. And so I was not allowed to do this. So I would have to unavoidably ask someone to do that, to perform that transformation of my cells. And this is when the question started, who do I ask to do this?
Yeah, can I just pause there just for one moment? Because I think this is also an important part to distinguish where the science and the art either they collide, or there's boundaries also within what you want to do as an artist, right? Because there's still rules in scientific laboratoria in what you are allowed to do and what you are not allowed to do. But then when you are basically pulling it towards the art, then there's maybe slightly different things you can do with, albeit with taking all the rules and protocols into account.
Well, as you put it very, very clearly, Daphne, there are rules. If you're working in a science lab, you cannot go against the rules. It would endanger potentially yourself. It would endanger the institution and the funding that comes to that institution. So for me, it seems very far-fetched to think that having artists in labs, for instance, would create anything very scary, because the artists, by being in the lab, they need to acquiesce to the rules of where they're working. There's no other way of doing it. There's maybe something I would like to note. It's not an ethical board kind of decision. This is a health and safety issue. So the problem with something like this is that I am basically creating cancer of my own cells outside of my body. And if I'm doing it myself, it is within the realm of possibility that I can reabsorb these cells into my body by accident, and my body will recognize them as self, my immune system. And so it will not know that they're cancerous, and that I would effectively be getting cancer
into yourself. Yeah, you created your cancer.
It wouldn't make any sense for me to do this, right? I think this is important to note. There are some issues which are ethical issues and that require the approval of an ethical board. So if you're an artist and you're working in a science department, if you propose something that may have ethical issues, just like the scientists, you need to ask permission from the ethical board. This is all over the world as well. You have tighter rules or less tighter rules depending on the country, but this made a very important question to the project and to the pursuit that I was following, which is, if I ask someone that I don't know, they're just there as an instrument and not really even a collaborator. There's nothing that they can really contribute to the project. And at the same time, I was thinking, but I'm thinking about immortality. And if I was going to make myself immortal in whatever that may mean through making my cells into an immortal cell line, then would I ever want to achieve immortality by myself alone? Is that the price that you need to pay for immortality, that you are rendered isolated from everything that's important to you, or that you over time become this isolate thing? Plays on a lot of the mythology that we associate with immortality. You know, who are the immortal beings that we imagine or that we know of? They're always the monsters. They're always the gods. They're always the superheroes. They're always sometimes they're born immortal. Sometimes they acquire their immortality. But it's always, there's one similarity, which is they're never human. And this differentiation of, from human, if you achieve immortality, you either become a god or you become a monster. And sometimes they're the same. So there's no other person that I can ask to do this with me except Luis, because he's a person that I chose to share my life with. So do I choose to share immortality with as well? So I make his cells immortal, and he makes my cells immortal. And this we are allowed to do. And because they are cells from the immune system, they need to be apart. So there is a price to pay for immortality in this case specifically. Even though it's very much a piece about achieving immortality together, it's very much about our relationship to each other and the choices that we make to share life and immortality together. So it is, in a way, this is why it's a prelude to the Marta piece. It's because it became very much about personal relationship, even though the roles of the collaboration were very much defined as the artist and the scientists. And that was not the case with Marta.
So what happens in this project is that the cells that you took from each other, they cannot interact with anything else, because then they will either be rejected or
they will reject.
They will kill. Right. And for that reason, you need to keep them isolated, and they can never meet. So so becoming immortal also means becoming isolated, or having to be isolated.
Yes.
And so what you did in the presentation of this work is that you found a way to then make them collide or make them meet, but that was just by projecting them. But then, can you explain what the actual artwork looks like?
The device, kind of what I designed and thought about for showing this piece and all of its a little bit of intricacy that is involved in it. When I wanted to show the life cells, I wanted to show the cells living, because it's very different to show a video of the cells under a microscope, or to actually understand that the cells are there and that you actually see them moving, and that if you touch the table where they are, you see that they're shaken by your presence as well. So it's sort of, the cells are alive in the gallery space, and they're presented on a table. They're presented on opposite sides of that table, again, to show people that they cannot be in the same place together. They need to be separated. Under each of the flasks, you have a microscope that connects to a projector, and that shows you on the table the live images of the cells in the flasks, growing and dividing indefinitely. As you were saying, the only place where you can actually see the two cell lines simultaneously and occupying the same space is on the overlap of the two projections. So this was the comment that we did. The cells themselves are on opposite sides of the table, but in the middle of the table, you have an overlap of the two feeds from the two microscopes, and the two cell lines are occupying the same space. Of course, this is only digital. It's the only possibility that we have of occupying the same space as immortal cells, is overlapping the two projections.
A lot of this is so very interesting, and we're going very deep into the scientific stories of it as well. And I think it's fascinating because there is so much overlap in the way you explain it with art and philosophy and science. I also want to be mindful of our time. And what I really want to ask you, I have two last questions. And one of them is what or who, it can be a concept, it can be a cell, it can be a person or a book. What is something that inspires you right now, these days? We like to give this as a tip to our listeners. So is there something that triggers you nowadays?
I have to say, the thing that really triggers my imagination most of the time, and that I go back into repeatedly, is fiction. So I'm not sure exactly if this is the kind of answer that you were looking for. It's not someone in particular. It's not a piece of literature. Every time I'm looking to get myself into the state of mind where I can actually play with concepts, mix them, or to create any clarity from the constant play of concepts and knowledge that occurs, I go into fiction. Science fiction, of course, very much so. I'm a very big fan of science fiction. I use it a lot to think.
It doesn't surprise me in the topics that in the topics and the questions that you pose with your works. Yeah.
I suppose what I mean by fiction is to imagine possibilities and to write about how your brain imagines these possibilities and puts at play different aspects and conditions to, what if? I suppose the fiction is in the what ifs of things, and then following those what ifs to some sort of completion.
What we also would like for people is to take away something from the conversation that we've had. And I think there's a lot There really is a lot to think about because it goes in all directions, and it asks a lot of questions about identity, about self, about definitions of those words. What if we would ask you to give us a souvenir from this conversation? We just asked for inspiration, so maybe the both of them overlap a little bit. But if people could take a souvenir, but this could be something that a person can do today, or something they can think about, or what would you give us?
That's a very hard question. I don't know. I suppose pleasure. It's fun, or it should be always a little bit of fun to pursue questions. If it was not fun or pleasurable, why would we motivate ourselves to do it? Even if it's hard or painful, it should be there should be a little bit of pleasure derived from trying to understand a little bit better, trying to learn a little bit outside of your comfort. I suppose it's one of my motivators, and it has been a pleasure to answer, or to try and not to lose myself answering the questions that you did pose.
We're glad.
And because that's my danger, is I get lost in my brain paths. And when people ask questions that spark a path, there's always bifurcations that I need to to choose from, and not pursue all of them at the same time, even though I wish I could.
Yeah, we all wish you could, so that we can join you on those those travels. But what would be your secret then to finding pleasure? Is there something you tell yourself, or is there always a question? Do you think this could be the same for everyone, or is this like very personal? How do you recognize pleasure for yourself?
I suppose that at the end you need to think. I don't know that for me specifically, in a very personal way, if I feel I'm not repeating myself, or that if I find myself in a different place, maybe for me the pleasure comes from acknowledging that I am not the same, that there was a transformation occurred over time. I think that's my pleasure for learning, is that I am, I know something else. That means that I am someone else at the end of something.
You're always continuing to question who you are. You want to be someone else after every experience, and your identity is constantly changing. I think that's a great souvenir. And what I take from it is that you always have to find something new in everything that you do, or in every conversation that you have, because that is what brings you pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for this conversation. There is as I said, there's a lot to think about, but it's extremely inspiring to see what kind of questions you ask of yourself, of life, of biology, and how to make these visible for others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Coexistence, a podcast produced by our Celium publishers. Editing by Axel Fruman, music by Mark Omen, and hosted by me, Daphne Fruman. Find us on your favorite podcast app and give us a follow, like, subscribe, and/or share, and we'll see you again soon.